Welcome, esteemed guests, to the Darkstone Dossiers with your host, Anthony Darkstone.
Greetings and welcome. Buonasera a tutti. Buenas noches. Buonanotte. Guten Abend. And a very good afternoon and good morning, wherever you may be on the planet. And of course, good evening to most of our dear friends in Europe. Welcome to another Darkstone Dossiers. Delighted that you could join us. Just a couple of things before we start the show proper. You will have an opportunity after the kind of main show. We go into a meet and greet mode, which those of you who attended before know what that is. And that's basically where you switch your mics on and you chat directly to my guests. If you're of a nervous disposition and don't want to do that, you can put any questions or comments you wish in chat, and I will read them out to my guest, and he will respond suitably. As is customary in all of the Darkstone Dossiers, I like to run a little clip that shows minute fraction of the work of my guests. Settle back and just watch a little bit of my guest in action.
Okay, Mark, you're a little bit stiff. You need to relax. Alright, okay. That's fantastic. Now, when you go on holiday, what's the one thing you really enjoy about going on holiday?
Nice clear water.
Nice clear water. Clear water, you swim in the water. Yeah. When you float on your back, you look up and what do you see? You see the bright sunshine and the yellow dye. Is that right?
Yes, you
So that's what? That's only 1 out of 5, right? You have greenish eyes and you chose the green dye. Is that right?
Yeah.
That's fantastic. There we go. So that's 2 out of 5. Well, this is our Darkman party, all right? This is a dark soul in the night here, okay? I'm a bit worried about you, but it was a black and white wedding, and he went for the black. So if you open your hand, you can see he's got the black. My second question for today, in the questioning mode, is what would it look like if we could read minds? Just write a 4-digit number on there without me seeing. I think this is an appropriate book, actually, for the theme of the project, The Scarlet Letter. Because Monica, if I could work with you a little bit here, I'm going to flick through the book, and I want you to stop on any page, and you're going to read the first word on the first line into your mind only. You're not going to read it out loud. Okay? So tell me when to stop whenever you like.
Stop.
Okay, the first word on the first line. That's great. Okay, Sylvia, if you could just select one card, please. That's great. I want you to look at the card, and then place it here. So we have a number, we have a word, and we have a card. Okay, let's see if I can get close to that. I'll start with you first. Don't say anything. That's great. You have a card. And you have a word. All right. I put those down just on the table. And now, for the first time, could you reveal your number, please?
7890.
7890, and your word?
South.
South. And your card?
Jack of flowers.
Jack of flowers with a jack of clubs.
Clubs.
And you'll see on the card I've written down 7890, jack of clubs,
Oh, wow.
and south. I'm just going to lay the key across your hand, and I'd like you to concentrate on the key, all right? And let's perhaps try it this way. And imagine that key and all the history that it contains. Now, keys, as we'll learn through the evening, symbolize many things. But tonight I want you just to imagine what that key represents and what it does and where it might have come from. And you see, ladies and gentlemen, it's beginning to turn your hand, is it not? Yes. Concentrate very carefully, ladies and gentlemen, on the key in his hand. If you could perhaps make it turn slightly more. But that's rather impressive, ladies and gentlemen, that someone who I've never met before until this evening can pick up an object brought here from London in Camden Market and produce that very subtle but discernible effect. Thank you very much.
Well, I promised you a little taste, and that's exactly what it is, just a little taste. You can actually get to see a little bit more of him on June the 17th, but I'll talk about that later. Before I actually bring my guest on, let me tell you just a few things about him. Can't possibly include everything. As you've seen on the clip, he belongs to various organizations. And since then, let me reiterate, he is an associate of the Inner Magic Circle with a silver star. He is the deputy chairman for the Association de Magiciens Internationaux. He is also the vice president of the Society of American Magicians International Assembly. I'm pretty sure I've left out some other things, but for the purposes of magic, that will do for now. So, ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together metaphorically or with a Zoom clap and greet my guest, Professor Dr. Todd Landman.
Thank you very much, Anthony.
Nice to have you here.
Great to be here.
Yeah. Now, I know we've been chasing each other around for a little while with your schedules and mine, but I am delighted and joyous, both personally and professionally, to finally have you on the Darkstone Dossiers. Before we get into magic, you also have a kind of different kind of magic because your PhD is in political science.
That's right.
The result of that is that you have been a keynote speaker in several major organizations around the world, ranging on various topics from human rights to other things. And just to give our audience a little feel, we have a little shot of you standing outside quite an interesting place in London, Chatham House, the Royal Institute of International Affairs. So that gives people a little bit of an idea of what you do in your spare time, if you actually have any. And even more things in your spare time. You have held various positions of note at different universities, and you are currently, of course, a professor at Nottingham University. So we'll take the still off, and I will leave you to elaborate on some of that, if you would, please.
Sure. So I've been in the UK now almost 30 years. I came here in 1993 as part of a funded project on social movement activity and citizenship rights. I worked with a British professor in 1993 on that project, and ultimately we published a book on what we found in that study. And I only came for a year, Anthony, and I'm still here. They haven't got rid of me yet. So I spent 22 years.
Sorry to interrupt you, but I think we should tell folks you came from Pennsylvania. Is that right?
Yeah, via Colorado. I arrived with a suitcase and a trombone, and the magic followed after that. So yeah, I was at University of Essex for 22 years, from 93 to 2015, and then came to University of Nottingham in 2015. Been here for 8 years now. And as the Pro-Vice Chancellor of the Faculty of Social Sciences, which in American terms, that's kind of like being the Dean of the faculty. We've got 10,000 students, about 900 staff, and we're very busy on our research, our teaching, working with local partners, regional partners, national and international partners. And, you know, you talked about me giving keynotes around the world. I have to say, one of my favorites was at the Great Hurl of Mongolia, which is their parliament building. And I was giving a lecture on democracy there. But I've spoken at the United Nations, the European Commission, The Hague, you know, in the Netherlands, all over Europe, been to about 50 different countries. The Mexican Parliament was another one that I did, and had tea with the former president of Chile.
Well, I think it would not be amiss if I were to refer to you as an academic.
That's correct.
Pretty obvious, I would have thought. Which leads me very nicely to your, to use a Texas parlance, your handle as a magician is obviously Dr. Todd Landman, but there is, shall we say, an attachment to it, a phrase,
Yeah.
which absolutely suits you, which is why I wanted to talk a little bit about this before we got to the magic per se, and that is the academic magician.
Yeah.
Now, what else could you possibly call yourself?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, what's interesting is the branding for that. And I did work with a marketing company on the logos that still I use on my website. But they put an ampersand in between academic and magician. So it could be an academic and a magician, or the academic magician. And the ambiguity is kind of fun. Because people do hire me as an academic, and they say, "Oh, you're also a magician. So could you give a keynote, and then after dinner, could you do a little something?" So it's a great combination. In fact, I did something for the European Fundamental Rights Agency in Vienna, and they took us on coaches to the top of a mountain into a hexagonic-shaped glass dining hall. And nobody knew what was going to happen. There was about 150 World Bank people there, the United Nations, European Commission, whatnot. And there I was doing mind reading and add a number sort of routines with World Bank data. And after I sat down, they thought, "What on earth was that?" Right? So it is a good handle, Anthony, and it's an unusual one, and it does combine really a lifetime of academic pursuit with a lifetime of magical pursuit.
Well, I happen to know that you were actually influenced by a remarkable gentleman who, shall we say, loved magic to the point that he spent quite a lot of his days actually telling people it was real. Well, of course it's real. We're all magicians here, but for the odd layperson, yes, it's real. So basically, this gentleman influenced you from a very young age, and you were given some work by him from your parents. Let's pull up the still of this gentleman, who I happen to admire a great deal myself. And that was none other than a man who had brilliant powers of deduction in his writing, but never for himself. And that was, of course, the legendary Conan Doyle.
Yeah.
And I rather like this quote of his. There are many wonderful quotes of his, obviously, but I like this because some of you here attending will know that I am, for want of a better word, a meticulous person. The idea being is that if you aim for perfection, you don't necessarily achieve it, but if you miss it, at least you're higher than most others. So tell us about your influence from your folks and how they probably, in a more subconscious way, instilled some kind of deductive abilities.
Yeah, so I grew up in central Pennsylvania, just outside Harrisburg, which is the capital of Pennsylvania, for those who don't know the city. And I actually grew up on a farm. It was about 13 acres of land, and the house was from 1757, which in American history, that's pre-revolutionary, folks. It was literally a log cabin structure. And my father was an immigrant from the Netherlands, and my mother, he met in Philadelphia. She was a nursing student, but we grew up in that house. And when I was quite young, they gave me the complete collection of Sherlock Holmes, and I read those stories back to back. And I was always struck by the study in Scarlet, where you get introduced to this idea of the science of deduction. So even at a young age, and in school, you do the sort of typical science subjects like mathematics, algebra, trigonometry, calculus, chemistry, biology, physics, etc. And of course, the power of deduction runs through all of that, or the science of deduction. But I was so inspired by the ability of Holmes to work out from a very small number of facts and observations. He could make inferences about all sorts of things, and of course, solve the crimes. But what you may not know, Anthony, is that when I applied to be a student at the University of Pennsylvania, I had to write an essay. In addition to supplying my grades and my standard aptitude test, I had to write an essay for admission. And I wrote a whole essay about why I was so enthused about the science of deduction, because I wanted to be a lawyer. And I just talked about how I would use the logic of deduction, the science of deduction in my law career. And I never became a lawyer. So that prediction was wrong.
Well, we always miss one, so that's okay.
Yeah, I was off by a lot.
but you've done pretty good since, actually, with all the various things. I mean, you recently, and we're drifting now like into magic, with recently attended, and I know there was a couple of people here with us in the audience that also attended the Doomsday Convention, which sounds dreadful, but it's not. It's actually quite a fun event for magicians of a certain genre, shall we say.
Yeah.
I think we have a couple of stills of those that pop up if we can pull them up. One of them, I think, is the Roche test, which is commonly known as the ink blot, if we can pull that up. There it is. And I think there's another one that kind of follows on from there, where you're holding a chart and talking about the chart. There it is, yes. Now, we'll pull that off the screen, and I would ask you to kindly, in fact, not just about Doomsday, but, the thinking behind that, and, well, just tell us as much as you possibly can on that.
Sure. So just to go to Doomsday, it's been running now 12 years. It was set up by Ronnie Chapmailly a number of years ago and taken over by Dan Baines. We used to meet in Whitby, which was fantastic because of the Dracula reference and everything.
I'm going to interrupt you for a second because I think this is an important point to make. Ronnie was a remarkable magician.
Yes.
That's an understatement. And I think together with him, you'd set up a few things which led to the Magiculum, etc., which we'll talk about in a minute. I just want to let people know who Ronnie was and, his status in the business. Please continue.
Yeah, so it's now moved to Derby, the Derby Conference Center. And of course, it was interrupted by COVID. And Doomsday, of course, it sounds really dark, but of course, the Doomsday book was just a register of people and property, right? But I like the Doomsday name so much. And Dan's really built a great program there. We had between 80 and 100 people at the Derby Conference Center. And it's a couple of days. There were folks over from the States that performed on the Friday. Michael Diamond always does this amazing show where he, puts needles through his neck and eats fire and does all this great stuff. And then on Saturday, we had a lecture from Professor BC, who's in our audience this evening, and a number of other lectures on ethics and performance. Afternoon lectures with Reese Shearsmith from the League of Gentlemen. And then the Hex Factor competition, which is where people get together and do a 10-minute program. And they had these green and red timing lights and all kinds of stuff. So there's a lot of pressure when you're performing. But to get to your point about the ink blots, many, many years ago, the ink blots were released into the public domain on Wikipedia. So they were no longer protected within the community of psychologists that were using them. So with Christian Schenk, the card shark, we produced the ink blot cards. So this is a deck of banks of cards, 5 banks of 10 cards each. And it's great because you get a sort of guide to the images on one card and then these repeated banks. So this is the typically the first card. It's in black and white, and then some black and red images. I'll put these up relatively quickly because you're probably familiar with them. But the idea behind using these cards is that they are what's called ambiguous images, which is to say they're of something and nothing at the same time. And a lot of people call this one the bat, for example, and it's in the still that you shared earlier. But when the analyst is trained with the code book, actually sits with a respondent or a patient and says, when you look at this image, what do you see? And they start to ask them what they see, almost like a tarot card reading. If they see a whole image, that's an indication of a relatively stable mind. If they see a moving image, then there are some concerns about there may be schizophrenia, for example. And if they focus on this as a whole image or part of the image, if they focus on some of the small, ends or dangly bits that might be hanging down, like this one, for example, lots of people think that looks like, an anatomical painting of, reproductive system or something. And they might even run into all of those sorts of thoughts. And you then get scored on your responses, and then that gives the analyst some idea of a psychological profile. So I thought this is a great premise for magic. The cards are available from Card Shark. They're absolutely wonderful and great to perform with. But I wanted to make them big for the stage. And I was heavily influenced by this novel by Caleb Carr called The Alienist, which is now a show on Netflix. And that was the idea of a turn of the century crimes in America, the sort of early 20th century America, New York City, a bunch of crimes take place. And the police were really, really bad at investigating crimes. So they put this team together of alienists, were people who engaged in psychological profiling at the nascent the birth of psychological profiling. I thought this is a great premise for an effect. So, in fact, the murderer from Doomsday is in our audience this evening. I noticed it when he logged on. But I get a scientific committee together on stage. I have photographs of women who died all at the same time in Manhattan and the surrounding boroughs. And of those four of those five, four of them died of natural causes and one died of, shall we say, unnatural causes. And the task of the committee then is to work out who the murderer is. So I had some really nice cards made up just of the 5 black and white images. And on the back of the card is this psychodiagnostic label, originally from the inkblot cards. These have been used by psychologists for years. Each person gets an envelope with a woman in it. That's an envelope, and each person gets one of these cards. There's sort of a matching effect. But because you showed the clip of the chart, I have to show the chart because Chris, who's in the audience today, chose one of the images that we call the warthog. And this is actually a statistical scatter plot of the severity of crime on the bottom axis and the different images running up the vertical axis. And of course, you see that these, pickpocketing, burglary, all the way up to murder, and then the images. And you see that this image here, which I call the motorcycle rider or the warthog face, correlates with murder. And Chris, of course, had his envelope. He had the warthog image. And of course, when he opened his envelope, he was the one that had the woman who was murdered. So unfortunately, he's with us this evening. He hasn't been caught by the police because he's gone into hiding. So it's a quasi-scientific demonstration. It's a double-blind test. There's a matching mind-reading psychological thing. There's references to the psychoanalytic movement, of course, with Freud and Jung, as well as Rorschach. And where Rorschach got the idea was a Victorian parlor game where people would write something on a piece of paper, fold it in half, and then when they open it, you get that symmetrical double image. And that's where the inkblot cards come from. There's all sorts of things you can do with them, but it's just been great performing both with the deck of cards from Card Shark as well as the stage version. I performed it at the IBM convention at Eastbourne for about 250 people in the Victorian theater there. And then at Doomsday, I also performed in the evening for about 80 people. So it's quite energetic, it's quite interactive. And then of course people learn something as well.
Which you do as the academic magician, wearing, of course, your professor's robe, which you are
always
now
have to teach.
Today. Yes, exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. So, and the reason I'm bringing that up, it's because it's all about visual before you actually, I, or anybody starts to do anything.
Yeah.
Really. So there is a perception in the audience mind, be they lay people or magicians or whoever, that, okay, here's something. So you look like an academic the moment you come on. They know you're called the academic magician. And when you're doing something like this with the psychodiagnosis, et cetera, and it's what I call, wearing my producer's hat, an interesting performance where it's not just, hey, look, pick a card and I can find it. So, Okay, great. Why would you want to do that in the first place? You can just take it out of the deck. You don't need to lose it again in the time. So I'm not being unkind to card people. I really am not. But, spectators are infinitely more intelligent than I think probably 50% of magicians believe they are. On that topic, I'd like to get your thoughts, if you be so kind, about what we talked about, if you like, in parenthesis, sort of, the branding and the visual and the image and how a performer is perceived the moment the curtains open or they come on or whatever it is. So wax a little and even lyrical on it, if you wish.
Yeah, well, it's slightly autobiographical in the sense that I had parallel lives for quite some time. I mean, I went through primary, secondary school, then university, then graduate school, 2 master's degrees and a PhD. Been in the university setting, University of Pennsylvania, Georgetown University, Colorado, then Essex, and then Nottingham. So there was this long line of just the academic life, as it were. And then there was the magical life. And in the early years, people would have me do cocktail parties or student dorm room parties or whatever. But I was doing what I would call straight ahead magic or straight ahead mentalism. So small book tests, manipulation, cards, coins, balls, that kind of thing. and it didn't have purpose, nor did it really link with the academic work. And I have to say, it was actually Ronnie Chaknai who he said, I'm going to make you more magical. And so we sat for almost 10 years talking about all sorts of things. And putting the gown on for the first time and walking on the stage, you have about 15 to 30 seconds to establish your authority and credibility on stage, and your likability. So you can't be menacing, because that makes people nervous, unless you're a dark performer and you want to be menacing. But I like to be serious and at the same time command authority, because I don't want hecklers and I don't want any kind of disturbances, of course.
Right.
And the other thing that I do, of course, is draw on my ability to give lectures, and there's a wall of information that comes at the audience. So in a way, information becomes misdirection, if that makes sense.
It makes perfect sense, yes.
And the themes of my shows tend to be everything from the purely hyper-rational sort of economic positivist, self-interested utility maximization, game theory, all that stuff, to the completely esoteric, right? And I was heavily influenced by Chuck Hickok's book, Mentalism Incorporated, where he has this thing, he talks about the increasing scale of implausibility. And I love this, that you don't want to come out and do something completely implausible, particularly with my persona. You want to do something that's gentle. Have you ever thought about, or a question to the audience that makes them think about something? And by the end of the show, you can go as implausible as you want to do. I have a whole routine I did at University of Huddersfield. I call the Orne experiments, that draws on psychological research I did at University of Pennsylvania with one of the most famous hypnotists, Martin Orne, and he was trying to figure out whether hypnosis improved your ability to recall things or not. And I turned that into an experiment, and we actually billed it as the Orne experiments. And the guests that came were asking the sponsors, saying, "Is this a magic show, or what is this?" And they said, "Oh, you just have to come and see." So we didn't even bill it as a magic show. And it had a period of discussion with the audience, and then some tests, the sort of stiff fingers and floating finger stuff, a little bit of age regression demonstration. And all of that was just power of the voice. It was prefaced with a lecture and some scatter plots and data and journal articles, which made it sound very academic. And then those demonstrations were quite personal to people in the audience. And then the last two things were just some image cards with, basic mentalism, drawing duped kind of stuff. But they were okay with that, because I had taken them on a very slow journey. It was about an hour journey to get to that point. And then that was the implausible bit. And at the end, because they had personally experienced the age regression phenomenon, they were in a sense more accepting that, well, actually, if he could do that, then possibly he could do mind-to-mind communication. So it's about setting that premise, I think, establishing your credibility on stage, and then also knowing your material. So I can give a full lecture on Martin T. Orne, 1985, University of Pennsylvania, going to his institute, doing the experiments, getting hypnotized, looking at the images, going back every week for about 6 weeks to see if I could remember the original set of images and whether hypnosis made a difference or not for my ability to recall those images. So I'm one data point in one of his articles. He did this for 898 people, and I was just one of them, right? But I'll never forget it, because I learned so much from him. He taught me about idiomotor response. He taught me about induction techniques, and he taught me about age regression, and some techniques to actually get people in that state of mind, which is really powerful stuff if presented properly.
Exactly. I think that's the key. I mean, the last two words you used, three words, if presented properly. And I think this is vital for all magicians to do that. I think one of the best examples, notwithstanding yourself, of course, is dear Eugene Berger. Blessings for his memory. Many of us here are acquainted with what's basically a piece of string that's burnt and then joined up together.
Yeah.
It doesn't sound like much. But when you draw, as he did, from the Mahabharata, which is a sacred text of the Hindu religion, and talk about Vishnu and the creation of the world. And of course, he had this deep, sonorous voice. I can't possibly imitate it, but he did that as Eugene would always do. And it's such a cliche to use this word, but it left people spellbound.
Yeah.
And I think this is important. I mean, you mentioned earlier on, Ronnie, a simple thing like saying to you, look, put your gown on when you're performing as the academic magician. Now, there's a lot of things no matter how good we are and how old we get and how long we've been in this business, just cannot see. And that's when a good mentor objectively looks at something and says, yeah, that's a strength. Let's use it.
Yeah.
Let's use it, which he did in your case. I want to pull up a still, and my Latin is absolutely useless because I haven't used it for years. Please correct my pronunciation. Nullus volat altius alis.
That's pretty good.
Oh, well, not bad. Yeah, there you go. Thank you. I appreciate that. Now, what on earth does it mean? It means send Todd $20. No, it doesn't mean that at all. Yeah, and he will do a psychodiagnosis. There it is. That is, if you look at the bottom, above the word "the founders,"
yeah,
nullus volat altius alis. I'm going to leave you to. I know what it means, but I think it's very important that you tell people what it means.
So before I tell people what it means, I'll tell them where it's come from and why it's important to me. So, it's a very magical phrase. Secondly, I have a coat of arms in the Magiculum here in Nottingham, which is a beautiful place where I read, write, perform, practice, host people, whatnot. But in the window is a suspended coat of arms from my family in the Netherlands, and I just got it back to the UK. I brought it back over my last trip there, and wrapped it very carefully, checked it under with great anxiety and worry, but we got it back in one piece. And it's a stained glass coat of arms from my family in the Netherlands, and it has that phrase at the bottom of it. So it's kind of a family motto, and the Latin roughly translated means "no bird soars higher." Which I think is a great motto, both for a magician, but also just anyone who wants to aspire to doing great things in life. So this "no bird soars higher" is just a lovely phrase. And I put it in the beginning of many of my books that I've published on magic. Gets included on posters and things like that. And you're the first person to ever ask me about it, which is really interesting. So it sits on posters for my shows, books. No one said, what does that mean? Why is that in your book? So you get a prize for being the first person for asking me that. So hopefully that's a satisfaction.
Okay, forget about the prize draw, people. I've won it. That's it. There you go. Well, I wanted to talk about it because you were kind enough out of the blue, and I've never told you this, so I'm going to do it publicly.
Uh-oh.
No, it's okay. It's okay. It's a good thing. It's a good thing. Like everybody in life, you have great days, tremendous days. Some days are okay, and then you have some really yuck days, as I would call them. Yeah. I was having one of those yuck days where, you know that feeling where you're kind of like putting everything into place, and for some reason, there are people on the planet who just can't keep in step. They just can't, for whatever reason.
Yeah.
And being a little bit of a perfectionist, that frustrates me more than it possibly should. That was the kind of day. And out of the blue, I suddenly got this wonderful certificate as a member of the Magiculum.
Yeah.
And I owe you a great debt of thanks. Wonderful. I mean, it just cheered me up. In the end, I thought, well, I don't care what else is happening in the world. Look at that. Look at that. Somebody thought I was great. Hey, wow, that's cool. You know how that I don't care how sophisticated you get, or PhDs or masters or whatever. I don't mean you. I mean, you know, I have a PhD, etc. But there is that little joyous, childlike thing when something out of the blue like that just happens, and you're kind of like 10 again, going, yay! Yeah. So that was it. And I mean, I did manage to thank you and everything else, but I've never actually publicly said the reasons why it meant more than even one would have initially thought that it would have meant. So that was it. So it perked me right up. Yeah.
I appreciate you telling me that. And for the viewers, Magiculum is a, as we academics say, a neologism. So it's a made-up word. And I was musing a couple of years ago, if I had a Magiculum vitae, what would that look like rather than a curriculum vitae? And if one were to do a course or study, how would you demonstrate that you had reached the credentials, in a kind of university setting. This is my Magiculum Vitae. And I shortened it to Magiculum, which is both a virtual space and a physical space. So here in Nottingham, I've got one, it's a physical space. But virtually, we had a group on a private group on Facebook for a very long time now called the Magiculum. And we've actually collectively written 2 books, the Magiculum 1 and Magiculum 2, which are nice essays from performers, readers, and others on philosophies of performance and magic, ethics, psychology, character, persona, consistency of persona, the contracts we make with our audiences, all sorts of neat things. And those folks I've met either face to face or have never met. We published the first one with iCorner Press, and the woman who sponsors that press is Camelia Elias, who's lives in Denmark. She's writes a bunch of books on tarot, and I went to visit her in Roskilde a number of years ago and spent time with her at her house. And she's a fascinating person. I mean, the house is just covered in books. She's got a big gong that she rings at midnight, and she goes out looking for berries and makes schnapps and all this other stuff. She was fabulous. And then I wrote the Magiculum 2 after that, which has a series of essays around authenticity and other forms of things to think about as a performer. And it's a great little community. We just sort of dump stuff in there that's quite interesting. We've got a woman by the name of Lynn Kelly on there, wrote a wonderful essay called Feminine Magic, which is quite interesting. She said, if you read any modern magic book, it says, you take the wallet and put it in your inside jacket pocket. She says, well, A, I don't carry a wallet, and B, I don't wear a jacket because I'm a woman.
Right.
So she found ways of wrapping cards in parcels with little things on them, or little notebooks that her grandmother would take notes in. And then, she had a small satchel or a bag that would work, or a drawstring bag instead of,
the traditional male pocket.
It's a male biased community. And a lot of the, a lot of the magic books still talk about wallets and pockets and coins in pockets and jacket pockets and waistcoats. And so she wrote this wonderful essay on feminine magic. But just to stay on her for a moment, she's also an expert in memory, and she's written this wonderful book called The Memory Code, and she studies indigenous knowledge systems around the world and how there are mental codes that indigenous communities use. And she did a lot of research on the indigenous community in Australia, and they know every bird on the coastline of Australia, but they've never written it down. So it's a combination of oral history, storytelling, and mental pegging. And she found tribes in Africa that use these boards with beads on them to remember their family histories and things like that. So fascinating person to have on the Magiculum. But I decided one morning that everybody been with me for about probably 10 years on that site deserved a certificate, because they'd written 2 books and have really been actively contributing to our conversations around deep meaning and magic.
Wonderful, because as I say, I'm very flattered that you invited me into the community, and then, as I've said earlier on, out of the blue, along came this certificate some little while later. Now, some folks know here, and indeed you do. I've spent a lot of time, and I really, really enjoy it in the Scandinavian countries, Norway and Sweden and Finland, etc., etc. But my favorite has got to be Denmark.
Right.
I go there quite a lot. I've lectured for the Danish Magic Circle, done some magic, and have some wonderful magical friends there. And you mentioned Roskilde, which is the Viking boat building, which was absolutely fantastic. So my friends, not magic friends, said, "Oh, I know what you're going to like." I said, "What's that?" And they said, "We'll take you to Roskilde," and they did. And that is an amazing place. And now that you've mentioned this lady, who I know, Lynn Kelly, of course, but I think on the next trip I should seek an introduction from you.
Okay.
It sounds about right, because where I usually stay with my friends, they have like almost a kind of healing therapeutic center, and it's
Right.
very esoteric. It's not sort of church and spiritual. It's really kind of more earth spirituality, if you know what I mean. So yes, I mean, absolutely, and I love this word, which definitely is now part of the English language, spelled Hygge, but pronounced hygge.
Hygge.
Yeah, which is a wonderful word of conviviality, of friends and round tabling, etc. And speaking of words and things. Now, you're something of a linguist. I think you speak about 497 languages and 3 dialects. Is that right?
Not that many.
No, I know. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. But you're quite a linguist. I think you spent time in Brazil, and your Brazilian Portuguese is excellent, and so on. And somewhere along the line, I suspect your English will improve as well.
Yeah, the Brits keep reminding me that my English needs to get better.
Yeah, I've noticed you've fallen into the British way of spelling.
I have to, because everything we
I
publish
noticed
is,
that.
yeah,
I noticed that. I noticed that. I'm so glad you brought these things up, because as you well know, and you are, as I mentioned earlier on, the deputy chairman on the board of the Association des Magiciens Internationaux, and we have 1 or 2 folks here as well who are on the board. This is something I think that down the line we will put together as a kind of round table. I have another program called Chilling with Darkstone, and as the title implies, it's exactly that.
yeah.
The last one we did was wonderful people like John Ryden, Mark Williams, and Frank Zach, etc., from Vegas, and we just chatted. They just chatted round table about what magic should be, how they saw it, and they're all youngsters of about 60 plus. So they had words that were wise. So that's something I think I would very much like to come and nag you about and anchor you down to.
Sounds wonderful.
Thank you. Some stage in the near future.
Yeah.
Now, you've talked to us. I mean, there are so many things that I would like to, but time, as always, is here in anything of this nature. I'd like to ask you if you would be kind enough to say a few words on how you perceive the presentation of magic. I mean, you've touched on it about a contract with the audience, and I think that's paramount. If you don't do that in your mind, then frankly, I'm going to sound really bad saying this, but you got no business standing on a stage or in front of a TV camera. You really haven't. You've got to do that for them. They're giving you their time and possibly money for a ticket, so you need to respect that. A lot of performers just come on and go, "Hey, look at me, what I can do," and I'm kind of going, "Why? Where's the segue? Where's the sequence? Where's the character?"
Right. Yeah.
So could you maybe give us some of your thoughts on some or all of it?
Probably not all of it, but
some of it.
Well, so maybe just a quick comparison of contrasts. I mean, I found myself watching Michael Vincent today on Facebook, who's a great Magic Circle magician.
He's a lovely man.
And just three effects: a coin effect, a 3-card Monty effect, and then a triumph routine. But I was more interested in his delivery, interaction, and developing rapport with people he brought. He's very formal. He's always extremely well dressed and extremely well spoken. And he had 2 people helping him, and he avoided all of the sort of pitfalls of what I would call bad magic. He asked the person to extend her hand. He didn't do that. No, give me the clean one. Garbage that people do. But he involved both of those people really effectively throughout the performance. It was a 15-minute performance. They were absolutely engaged. The audience was engaged. He was erudite. He was well-spoken, and his magic was flawless, right? So I love that. Nice close-up demonstration. I would contrast and compare him with Luc Germain, who I've seen perform many times. And he has the audience in the fingertips, in the palm of his hand, completely different style. And at one point, I remember him doing some sort of mind reading effect. And he pulled his shirt up and had this chest, this completely tattooed, and he's sweating. And this woman has her hand on his chest, and he's revealing all these thoughts. And I thought that was really compelling, slightly upsetting, and a bit sort of scary in a sense. But that's the point, right? And absolutely compelling to watch. My own approach, of course, you have to think about the parameters you set for yourself. If I am an academic magician, I'm not going to be doing really weird stuff. I'm not going to swallow swords. I'm not going to do blockhead. I'm not going to do some of the effects.
Or bare your chest with tattoos.
No. I keep the tie on, I like consistency of character for sure. But also this thing you say about sequencing and segue, that it's not one trick after another. It is a story and a linking set of themes. I was getting ready for a show here in Nottingham, and my partner said, you do a lot of stuff that to me sounds like the lost voices of history. And I put it in my show. I called my show The Lost Voices of History because it was about people who were either not known about or something happened to them that people didn't know about. So, for example, my book test, which is about the Colney Hatch Mental Hospital in London, is a patient registry from the 1930s of people who were in that facility. So you get details about the people that were in the rooms, the treatments, any notes the nurses might have made, photographs of the facility. But the real story is that it was built in 1851. It's the largest mental hospital in Europe at that time. The halls were 6 miles long if you walk all the halls. And
6 miles,
it's a
did you say?
gigantic facility. And the irony, of course, is it's now Prince's Park Manor, and it's very expensive condos for S Club 7 live there, right?
Right.
But that the story, the sequencing, the bringing in, to me, it was all a message around social justice, but also the lost voices. We don't know about the patients that were in the facility tonight. We are going to commune with one of those people who is a lost voice of history, right? And I think that thematic ordering helps me design my shows. I've gone from shows that had quite complicated titles to now single word titles. I think it's really important just to have a headline grabbing title for a show and that it questions more than it answers.
You're very, very good at that. I hate you because you just kind of go and you pluck this a one word for a show and it makes sense. Now, I'm not going to say what your recent one is because you've told me. I'd rather you said it.
Sure.
And then you've had also one word titles for a couple of other things. Care to share that?
Sure. So, the book test is called Luna for obvious reasons, but I'll let you work that out.
Okay.
But I did a show for the 50th anniversary of University of Essex, which was founded in 1964. And in 2014, I was asked to put a show together that celebrated that history. And that one I called Then and Now, which I thought was kind of fun. And the show really was tying together all those 50 years from 64 to 2014 and had a lot of wonderful effects. And then I did a show here at Nottingham I called Subversion. And it links politics, magic, and jazz, which do not sound like things that should be linked together. But if you think about it, if you think about the great civil rights leaders, you think about Frederick Douglass, the great abolitionist, you think about Che Guevara. These are people who disrupt and subvert the status quo, right? If you think about Miles Davis or Billie Holiday, right? These folks took Western diachronic music and they put the notes in the wrong place for a kind of classically trained person. But, the amazing thing about a Billie Holiday is that she has a very limited range in terms of the lowest note to the highest note she can sing. But in between, she has infinite expression that sends a shiver down your spine when you listen to her. Absolutely. And I like that subversive quality to, revolutionaries, if you will, politicians, people who disrupt the status quo, and then, of course, jazz musicians. And I thought, well, magicians do this as well. They disrupt our sense of reality and our perception. A good show should disrupt the audience and then somehow settle them, but maybe not, and leave an ambiguous ending, or it will settle them and they say, okay, it makes sense now, or it doesn't. And there's a lot of subverting the status quo that takes place within magical performance. So that show I really had a lot of fun putting together. And then just because you asked me, I am working on a new show I just call Truth.
I know, you told me that. I can't believe it. But this is so apropos for your kind of magic, obviously.
Yeah.
But also a magic show. I mean, just think about what you have. I'm just asking the audience to join me and think about it for a moment. A magic show with a one-word title called Truth. I mean, choose your own adjective to describe that. I mean, is it ironic? Is it funny? Is it serious? I mean, choose your own adjective. But I just think it's wonderful, whichever adjective you choose. It's just the truth.
Well, as it happens, the philosophy of truth is very complicated. how do you actually know something is true? Right? I mean, sounds like a simple question. There's been, several thousand years of thinking around, how do we know something is true and when it's true? But equally, the use of the word truth is running through our cultures, right? So, I was looking at the Declaration of Independence from the United States. We hold these truths to be self-evident, right? That's the second line of the Declaration of Independence, right?
That's the most ridiculous statement ever, isn't it?
And in the civil rights movement in America, you have this Quaker phrase, speak truth to power, right? That's a powerful thing, right? Or when you testify in court, I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God, right? The other one I liked was Kellyanne Conway after the inauguration of Donald Trump, where they were saying, well, your press secretary said this, and she said, well, the press secretary, Sean Spicer, was just presenting alternative facts. This idea of alternative facts, I mean, that's going in the show, right? And then my favorite one probably is truth is stranger than fiction. And so as magicians, we're creating both truth and deception at the same time. And really, from the moment we walk on stage to the moment we leave, we tell many untruths, or at least we want our audiences to believe what we are saying is true, when in fact so much of what we say simply is not. And what you don't want them to figure out is when you're telling the truth and when you're not telling the truth. And I think a strong performer will give a very convincing and authentic performance where the audience goes on that journey with them, and at least suspends disbelief and goes with whatever's being presented in the show. So lots of things happening. The show is relatively dark in places, a little bit thought-provoking, hopefully. I'm really enjoying writing it at the moment. So stay tuned.
Oh, absolutely. You bet. Yeah, right. You bet. Well, I think we're coming to the time where shortly we'll have to draw our prize and so on. But before we do, I'm sorry to spring this on you, and feel free to say no in any of the languages that you know. Is it possible I could persuade you to do a little something for us?
I think you can persuade me, and I'll answer your question in the best American English I know.
Okay.
Yeah, no problem. And I'm not sure what it is you're after, Anthony, but you and I were talking the other day that I love researching history in this country, and I was doing some research on the history of the Lancaster bomber in World War II, and I came across. But I've been researching the history of the Lancaster bomber, and I went to the West Yorkshire Archive Service, and I found a key document in my historical research that's absolutely critical to understanding this moment in history. And I'll share it with you now. Hopefully you can see that. It's the Mickey Mouse Weekly from, as you see the date there, 1940. There, maybe you can see that. It says it's February 1940.
Yes, you can. Yep.
Now, okay, you're probably wondering what's going on here, but this Mickey Mouse Weekly turns out to be extremely important because alongside that newspaper in the archives, I found this. Now, hopefully you can see this. Is that okay for everyone?
Yeah, you can bring it down a little bit more. That's fine. That's perfect. That's perfect.
So this was in the archives next to where the newspaper was, along with documents and ephemera and everything else. But my attention was really, really drawn to this, and I've been able to have it out on loan from the archives and just look at the contents. And the more I study the contents, the more absolutely fascinated I become with what's inside this small travel case from 1940. And before I open the case, the one thing that's in there, along with other things, is a small schoolboy diary from 1940, a young boy called Roderick. And he has filled out every day an entry in the diary at that time. And if you cast your mind back to 1940, in Leeds, where he comes from, and that's where the Lancaster bombers were both flew out of, but also were manufactured by the Avro manufacturing company. This young boy grew up in that area under threat of attack by the Luftwaffe, And of course, at that time, you see in the diary, he talks about when the bombings started, just at the turn of the year. And so, you get this daily account of a young boy's life. So in some of the entries, he talks about going down to the shop and getting his Mickey Mouse weekly. So that was something that, his parents would give him some pocket money. He'd go down to the shop and get that newspaper. Other days, he said, I practiced the piano. I did my maths homework. There's a great entry on a Friday. He said, we prepared for the gang fight. And then the Saturday entry was, we won the gang fight. And he's 10. This kid is 10. It's absolutely fascinating. And the thing that I like about all those entries is that this is almost like the day in the life of a young boy. It's extremely existential. It's not just about 1940. It transcends history, because this young boy is facing threat of bombing in a war, but he still has his day-to-day chores to do. He still practices the piano, does his math, gets involved in fights, maybe gets grounded. His father was from the local defense volunteers. So there's this incredible portrait of a young man's life in this diary. And we're going to show you the diary in a moment. But the other thing I realized about Roderick is he was a very clever young man, and he's actually created a time capsule because he's kept things in this box that have meaning to him. So we just open the box. The three things on top that have a lot of meaning is a half-crown coin. Hopefully you can see that.
Yes, we can. Yes, we can.
Slightly cracked wristwatch. And then a 10 bob note or 10 shilling note from that time. You can see all that.
Yes, we can.
So clearly in this box, these things were of great value to him. Now I see someone named Brian Roll.
Hello, hi, hello. We've never talked. Well, we've met, I think, but we never talked. So
okay. So
fantastic.
Brian, you've seen three things here. You've seen the half-crown coin, the wristwatch, and the 10 shilling note. Could I ask you just,
fantastic.
So you've seen the coin, the wristwatch, and the 10 bob note. I wonder which one of these important things, clearly Roderick, held these in high regard. They're cherished possessions and treasures. Which one of those do you think has most meaning out of those three?
The wristwatch.
The wristwatch. Okay. So if we just put the wristwatch to the side here, we can all keep an eye on that. And let me just remove the tray and show you things that are inside. So for example, his grandfather, wonderful picture of his grandfather. Some of these things I can just lay down. There's blank postcards that you would have sent during the war, okay, from the UK to others. He was a great stamp collector. It turns out these are lovely stamp. I think they're French stamps, but from Francophone Africa. I love this. This is his eyeglass prescription from the local ophthalmologist. A Leeds United football card. Another relative, perhaps his father or an uncle. This one I really liked was Rab and Friends. This is a little storybook of a dog and a young boy whose favorite pet is a dog. So you can see the charming nature of all of this. There's more stamps, more pictures of relatives, and then one of my most favorite things is a semaphore card learning system where you would learn all the moves of semaphore. And I also noted in his diary that he has drawings of airplanes that he saw in the air. We'll just put this one here for the moment as well. That's just a little piece of blotter paper. And finally, just a couple of things like a pill case and an iron figurine that he would play with. These are lovely objects, right? And we finally, in this time capsule, get to the schoolboy diary. Just shut the box for a moment. Schoolboy diaries, you see it's Let's Schoolboy Diary, and there's an entry on every page and in every day of the diary telling these stories about practicing the piano, doing his math homework, getting in fights for the year 1940. Now, Brian, the weird thing about all of this is that I think Roderick's playing a bit of a trick or a game with us, or on us even, because one of the pieces of paper that I pulled out of the box has a little statement written in his 10-year-old handwriting. And I don't know if you can read that, but it says, please look at the Leeds United football card. Look at the Leeds United football card. I don't know if folks can see that enough on the camera.
Just about enough. Yeah.
Just about
Okay.
enough, yeah.
Yeah.
So the amazing thing is that there is this Leeds United football card from 1940, and it's got the detail of the player on the back. And again, I'm not sure you'll be able to see this, but there's a handwritten date at the bottom. It says 05/10/40, written in Roderick's hand. Again, I don't know if that's visible, but it is there. And
not quite. We'll take your word for it.
were we live, we would see that, and it would be
Yes.
confirmed by Brian, who would be able to hold it.
Okay,
look at it.
now it's showing, yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
great. Okay, it's just the lighting.
Now it's showing, yeah.
So it says 05/10/40. So it's the 5th of October, 1940. And if I go to the 5th of October, 1940, and this is where I think Roderick was probably a genius. There's August, September, October, 4, 5. Now again, if I can get the angle right on the entry on the 5th of October, can you see what it says there?
It says, got a new wristwatch picture. Okay, something picture.
That's fine. I think I
Yeah,
got
you
a
got
wristwatch.
I got a new wristwatch. Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
indeed, Brian,
Oh,
the wristwatch.
fantastic.
Thank you very much.
Very well done.
So, Anthony, you asked the question, and I answered the question.
You did splendidly, as always. Yes, thank you. I always remember our first meeting, in fact, where we collided with each other almost. I can't
Yes,
remember.
at St. Pancras Station.
Was it St. I can never remember which one it is, King's Cross or St. Pancras. I just come
Yeah.
off a plane and hurtling along somewhere, and you looked, and I looked, and I went, right, okay. And then we had some people you were meeting take a picture and all kinds of stuff. Yeah, and then the rest, as they say, is history, all the way back before 1940.
Yes.
What can I say? Thank you so much. Really, really thank you so much. I don't know about anybody else, but I suspect they'll probably agree with me. It's just been an absolutely lovely, lovely conversation with you, and delighted to have your thoughts on so many things. As I say, down the line, we'll be doing sort of more, as you may recall, Brian, in fact, is also one of our board members on
Right.
AMI, Association Magiciens Internationale, and all of that will come to light as we move along. So I think what we'd like to do now is to ask you to perform one other small task, if you would.
Sure.
We have dropped, or we haven't, Austin has put into his hat the names of folks who have bought a ticket. He's going to juggle them about, and he will draw and put himself on the screen, I suppose, if he can. And then you get, oh, he's there as well.
There he is.
Yeah, you don't need me, guys, but
He's got a hat. He's got names in the hat.
Yeah, he's got names in the hat. I'm just going to ask him to pull two out. One in each hand, if you would, please. Yeah. There's two, one in each hand. Okay. Now, your task, if you wish to accept it, Todd, is to choose a hand. It doesn't matter which one.
Okay.
Whichever one you choose is the one we will use. That's a Max
Okay.
Maven line. I stole that from him. Yeah.
That's a good line.
Yeah, isn't it? So, whichever one you choose.
Well, I'm going to channel my mother because she said she always gets lost. And if she's lost, the best thing you can do is always turn left. So I'm going to say left.
Left. Okay. Hold on to the left. Drum roll or a bugle blast or both. It is
Farley Carter.
Farley Carter.
Carter.
Yes.
Fantastic.
Wonderful, 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 Mr. Carter. Congratulations, sir. I have your email. we will be in touch, and in due course, Austin will pull it up, I'm sure. This is your prize, and Todd will tell us a little bit about what that is.
Yeah, so I've been working on some new material that hasn't really been released yet, Farley. So I call this Offerings from the Magiculum. It's about a 23-page manuscript, and it has 2 routines. I wouldn't call them effects. So the first one's called the Grand Master, which is basically a sequence of chess mentalism routines that take you from the plausible to the slightly implausible through about a half an hour, maybe 45 minutes worth of material. And it's really framed around the idea that grandmaster chess players use what's called cognitive chunking when they play chess. So they don't think in individual moves, they think in clusters of moves and control of the board almost in a territorial, militaristic way. And there's some journal articles and other things that reference that, but also this idea of the unconsciously competent person. So whenever you see a jazz musician or a magician who you really, really like, they've already gone through the 4 stages of learning, from the sort of consciously incompetent to the unconsciously competent. And chess players are really engaged in the same activity. And using that as the frame, then you try to replicate the ability of the grandmaster through a series of demonstrations of mind reading, matching, and prognostication, as it were. And then the second one I call the Pie of Tarot, and that was influenced by the late Rachel Pollack, who's a great author, writes about the tarot. And there's a series of passages in the 78 Degrees of Wisdom where she's talking about the structure of the fool's journey into the conscious, the subconscious, and the superconscious. And what's really cool is that if you take the 22 cards in the major arcana, divide them by the 7 cards in the rows of the fool's journey, you get 22 over 7, which is pi, and that of course is the golden ratio. So the routine is very much grounded in this idea of mathematical principles that are universal, the golden ratio, and it's a super easy to do routine, but at the same time you're able to discern a tarot card that someone thought of by making reference to the conscious, the subconscious, and the superconscious level, and the concordance, as it were, with the different major arcana tarot cards. It's all explained, referenced, and developed. So I'll send that to you as a special PDF.
Great thanks, as always, to the Zoom director, Austin Moody, and of course, all the people who help behind the scenes, and of course a shout out to another board director of ours on AMI, and that's Michael Kelly, who helps me with all the Eventbrite and everything else.
Right.
So absolutely grateful for all these things. And well, I think what we'll do now is keep the promise of opening up the room. You can switch on your microphones if you wish and speak directly with Todd. Michael Kelly. Michael, good to see you.
Yeah, and this was wonderful tonight. Thank you for doing it, Todd. Thoroughly enjoyable. It was great to meet you again at Doomsday this year.
Yeah.
And you were at the first Doomsday I attended, which was back in the Whitby days. I remember you did a full presentation that afternoon. And every time I've seen you, and I've watched several of the videos you've shared in various places, and I'm always struck by how congruent you are. It's a wonderful word. The way you speak, the things you say, the things you do, the way you appear, and the way you work with people is all one. And this is just so important. And it's being congruent like that is a secret that we all need to learn. And there's a secret behind the secret, of course. The reason you're so congruent is because I think you're expressing who you really are. This is absolutely you, and these are things you're genuinely interested in, and
Right.
That really comes through. So I've always found that really inspirational. And I think I've got another clue as to why this evening, because being who I am and the way I'm always fascinated in books, I was scanning your bookshelf and I see you've got The Night Circus there, which is probably the most wonderful novel I've ever read. So you have excellent taste there too, sir. So
Well,
thank
thank
you,
you.
and thank you, Anthony.
Thank
Oh,
you, Michael. I mean, on your thing about congruence is interesting because one of the things I think you get from teaching for so many years is, or at least, I've watched a lot of good teachers. One of my favorite exemplar of a teacher is Robin Williams in the Dead Poets Society, because he connects with all those kids, right? And when I was a student at Penn, I had a couple of those professors that I'll never forget. There was a guy named Jack Reese that taught modern European history. And he probably gave the Holocaust lecture every year for 20 years. But when he gave it to us, he was weeping, right? And I thought, does he weep every year? But he was just so human about the presentation. And he had us read fiction as well as history. So we read Albert Camus' The Plague. We read Survival in Auschwitz, Primo Levi. We read, The Temptations of Totalitarianism, all this great stuff. Those were the days when you actually got university students to read. But the other thing, I guess, when you teach is trying to connect with the students, and I think it differs different parts of the world. I've taught in continental Europe where the style, at least in Southern Europe, is very didactic. They want the professor just to tell them what the concepts are. And so I turned up in Venice to give a lecture on democracy, and I went up to this student and put a microphone almost, sort of Phil Donahue style. What do you think is a strong feature of democracy? And they said, oh, I couldn't possibly say that. Only the professor can tell me that. And I said, no, I'm asking you, right? And that idea of connecting with people, the other secret behind the secret is that I have a ridiculously stupid memory for people's names, and I don't know where it comes from, but out of a show of 200 people, I will remember all 25 people who helped me. And I think that makes people feel comfortable and welcome. Because if you say, what's your name again? Your whatever? No, you get their name, you remember it. It must be some sort of mental pegging, system I've got in my mind, I guess. But I think that's an important component. Try to draw in your audience, make them feel like they're part of the conversation and they're helping you. They're participating and they're not just sitting there passively and watching. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Todd. Let me go up the gallery again and see if anybody's got their hands up.
Brian has.
Brian has. Yes, please.
Hello.
Brian, up you go.
Hello, Anthony. So,
Hi, Brian.
well done once again, and of course, well done, Todd. That was really nice. To get to know you a little bit as well, and everything what you're about. So that was really interesting, and also the presentation and how you managed to draw in the person, taking the things out of the box and making that story very interesting, the little boy and all his little items and his diary. So that is really nice. It's something that I'm currently looking at the moment, in performance style, which will be changing in a couple of more years for myself, but it's sort of where I'm going with my magic at the moment when I'm performing it, especially in close-up at the moment. So it's going there. But that's really nice, those little touches. And of course, everything that you have been presenting and what you have been talking about.
Thank you so much. And I'll tell you a little story. When I got this diary, I put it in a drawer for about 5 years because I thought this is like gold. It cost me £5 on eBay, right? And it is, I looked through it and I thought, I'm not going to write anything in it. I'm not going to make a card diary effect, which is kind of the mentalist's, go-to routine, which is great if you're doing that sort of stuff. And then I pulled it out one day and I started to read the entries and look at his drawings. And I thought, gosh, there's a whole sort of portrait of a young man in here, and I was like channeling my inner James Joyce, portrait of an artist as a young man, all that kind of stuff, it was just brilliant. So I really sat on this for a long time, and it took about 2 years just to gather all the things that I need to be able to do that routine. The video that Anthony shared in the beginning of me performing in New York, I actually took that to New York and performed at the Mystery Parlor there that Mike Maione runs. And, again, it was funny because we got a date, and of course the Americans flipped their months with their days, whereas Europeans do it the other way around. So we had a bit of byplay with that. But anyway, it's on YouTube and you can see a full performance of it with a live audience. And I've also performed this at Doomsday as part of my lecture and performance stuff that Michael was referring to. But I appreciate your thoughts, and you just send me an email. I'd be happy to exchange some ideas with you.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you so much.
And where are you based?
I live in Malta at the moment, so I'm based in Malta.
Well, the great thing is Malta's filled with wonderful history and icons and buildings and stories that you could do a whole show based on Malta alone. So I've not been to Malta, but I know a lot about it.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. Actually, I do have a show over there, and we are based inside a building that was built by the Knights of Malta, and part of my story in the show is based around the Knights of Malta and how
amazing.
And amazingly enough, this building was built by the knight who was into magic. Honestly, I mean,
oh my God, you couldn't have made that up.
No. However, it's a kind of magic that he used to do in those days, or the way they refer to it because of the Inquisition. So, however, we're not very sure about the relationship between what sort of magic they were performing because of the Inquisition in those days. Because we have the Inquisitor's Palace here in Malta as well. So that was a scary building at the time.
Well, Brian has this wonderful thing. It's called the Chamber of Mysteries, which is a lovely name.
Yeah.
And if I remember it correctly, and I'm sure he'll correct me, the walls, as you just heard, were sort of built yay back in the day, and they're like yay thick, as you can imagine, from solid stones. He's traveling around these, which is one of the reasons why we have him on the board as well.
Right.
In case people are wondering, why are these people on the board? Well, for good reason, and in due course, yes, when we sort of go live, we're just waiting for, the final touches on the website and everything else, and which hopefully we will have in good time, because we're going to do our second AMI Gala, which you gentlemen know about already.
Yes.
And I will, in due course, get, all the news and everything else about that out. So the first mention will be in the Magic News Network. If you are not a member, please go to the Facebook page. It's just called Magic News Network, and just ask to join, and myself or my presenter, Michael Likey, will just add you. So, that's it. Okay, anybody else? Chris has got his hand up. Right,
Yeah,
Chris,
great. Chris,
floor is yours, sir. Go ahead.
Hi, Todd.
Hey, how you doing, Chris?
Yeah, my obvious question is, what have I done to offend you?
I think you're made of tough stuff, Chris. You're all right.
Yeah. My other question is, at Doomsday, I got the opportunity to volunteer for quite a few people, which was fascinating for me because I'm not a performer. I'm somebody who finds it completely one of the most scary things to think of, to actually go up in front of the people and perform. But it was fascinating to stand next to people who are performing and to be absolutely calm myself and to watch how they were performing and to see some of them have nerves and some of them not have nerves. And you didn't have any. I couldn't get any nerves off you at all. You were so calm. What is the secret? And for someone who does find it incredibly scary, any advice?
I think the nerves start when you're quite young, and then you learn to cope. So I've been performing live since I was 11 years old. Started in 1977, and I guess there's something about hardening yourself. I think when I started out, I was quite nervous because when you think about, you're thinking almost in four parallel dimensions at the same time when you're performing, because you're thinking about what you're actually saying in real time. You're thinking about what you need to do to make something happen or not happen. You're thinking about what happens next, and you're also thinking about what happened in the past. And the ink blot is actually a real-time revelation of information. So I didn't know you were the killer until a third of the way into the routine. And then that tells me what else to do. So there are 5 different options in the routine, routes, as it were, that I need to follow. And there are times when you're performing on stage, you forget to get that piece of information. I make sure I don't anymore. But so I think it's about knowing your material, knowing what you're going to say and how you're going to interact with the audience. So those things are covered off. And then knowing your sequences and practicing so that you absolutely know what comes next. So you're not even thinking about it. And this this gets back to this unconscious competence. And I've been reading this book by Adam Gopnik called The Real Work. And this is actually influenced by magic and card magicians. And so he took his son to Las Vegas to watch magicians for a weekend or something. And then on the way back on the plane, they were practicing card tricks together. And he talks about Vernon's twisting the aces, which you and I spoke about at Doomsday. But there's a whole chapter on, what is it? He refers to the real work. Magicians say, who's done the real work on that? And what they mean is not necessarily the person who invented the trick, but the person who's just really nailed it, right? And he has, stories about how he's learned how to make bread or drive a car as well. So how do you go from that, consciously incompetent level up to the unconsciously competent? And, I'm not being arrogant or anything in saying what I'm about to say, Chris, but the performance you saw, I've done online to people. I've done it live to people. I've done it for the last 10 years. And the last version I did at Eastbourne, I started to use some of the new materials you saw there. So there was confidence behind taking that to Doomsday. It wasn't like, oh, I'll try something new at Doomsday, right? I took something I'd done for 10 years. I think if I took something that was brand new for Doomsday, I would have looked more nervous than that particular thing, which is to say I get nervous too. Particularly before just stepping on stage. I go to the toilet probably 100 times before going on stage. It's just, if I'm drinking soda or water, or whatever, suddenly it's just like, gotta pee, you're just, and then you get on stage and it just sort of snaps and you're ready to go. And then the show's over. I mean, I do 2-hour stage shows and you come off at the end and you're sweating and you're exhausted. But because you've rehearsed, sequenced, practiced, scripted, and done it over many iterations and many years, you build that confidence. You also know that things might go wrong because when you're doing something with a live audience, you never know what anybody's going to say. And you either turn it to your advantage or you try to get rid of it really quickly. Right? And so you try to, I like to incorporate people. Somebody might say something funny, or somebody might make an observation that had nothing to do with anything you did, but you take credit for it. And that's always fun as well. So I was giving a lecture at one point and I talked about where do people's surnames come from? The reason people have surnames in this world is because the state needs to tax you, right? So I looked at this German student in the audience and I said, your name might be Miller because your father was someone who milled grain. And he goes, but my name is Miller. I said, yeah, I know that. And he said, but how'd you know that? I go, well, it's just a little something I do. And then I moved on to someone else. I had no idea that guy's name was Miller. So there is a certain experience, I guess, that comes from being in front of people, but there's nothing that moves away from the idea that you just have to know your material. You have to practice. So having the Magiculum here, I have a mirror I can watch. I can stand and set up my props. And actually, as I work through things, I think, oh, no, that has to be on this part of the table and that part of the table. And when I was at Doomsday, I absolutely scanned the room to work out where I was going to put the people and where, the images are going to be distributed and where I was going to move out front of you guys with the background. You see it in the pictures. The scientific committee's behind me. I'm right in front with the audience and then come back to the scientific committee and work with each person on that committee. So I don't know. I think some of it is now unconscious. I just know where I'm going to put people and how things are going to work. Other times I actually draw, maps of the stage in my study and work out where everything's going to fit, where I'm going to be as well, and where the audience is going to be. And then there's still random acts of all kinds of things that can happen in a show, and you simply have to be prepared that things may go this way or that way, depending on what happens.
Brilliant.
Sorry,
Thank
that
you,
was a
Todd.
really rambly answer to your question.
No, that was perfect. Thank you, Todd.
Yeah.
Thank you, Anthony. I'll go back into hiding now.
No need. I was just going to say, in fact, you mentioned you're not a person who performs because you don't like to stand in front of people, and that's fine. I mean,
Sure.
That's okay. You can be an ardent magic lover. My brother, in fact, loves absolutely adores magic. He doesn't perform. My grandfather, his grandfather obviously as well, and our father. Sounds like the beginning of a prayer. My brothers and my father. Right, I'll get this right in a minute. Was also a magician. Hobbyists, not pros. So as Todd was saying, the audience should not ever see, and this is a phrase I learned from a very dear friend, he's gone now, blessings to his memory, Steve Dackery. It's hiding the skill within the art.
Mm-hmm.
And if you know how to do that, then it becomes, in a sense, easier not to be nervous. Because as Todd was rightly saying, there's practice, 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 and to which I will add, I suppose, right, is an appendix or addendum to it, is then rehearse, 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 rehearse. And practice and rehearsal is not the same thing.
And this is going to sound a bit weird, but in jazz music, there's this saying that people say oftentimes it's not about the notes you play; it's just as much about the notes that you don't play.
Mm-hmm.
And when you listen to Miles Davis' Kind of Blue, there are sometimes when he's improvising solos, there may be up to 5 beats between notes, and it doesn't matter. You don't have to play over everything. An inexperienced jazz musician will want to just blow a line forever, and sometimes they play too many notes. And Miles was always very good at leaving these big dramatic pauses. Freddie Hubbard's another one, a great trumpeter. Freddie Hubbard would do that. John Coltrane would leave big gaps in what he was doing and then play 64th note, arpeggios. And it was just absolutely extraordinary what he could do, but he didn't have to. And I think it was about choosing when to play and when not to play, and when to come in and not come in. And I think magic has similar offbeat moments and other things. I was watching Michael Vincent's coin routine today. He could have done it probably twice as fast as he did it, but because he did it so slowly, like the Rennie Levand, does everything so slowly, right? And Michael Vincent, he just did beautiful stuff, with these coins, and pulled them out of the bottom of people's hands, and then made sure that they counted. I had 3 and now I have 2. And he said, yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? And it was all just like this beautiful, buttery, smooth performance. And you see sometimes inexperienced people, I think they compensate sometimes with speed. And so the analog of playing too many notes is like doing too many tricks. And I think TV is to blame for this as well. If you ever talk to the producers on BGT or whatever, they say, we need 6 tricks in 6 minutes. And like, well, one of my tricks might be 10 minutes, but it's got a great finale and your audience will love it. No, that's not going to work for us. We want 6 tricks in 6 minutes. And I said, then I don't want to be on your show.
You've got the great Russ Stevens, in fact, who's one of the brilliant consultants on that show. And since the passing of Johnny Thompson, respect RIP, on the Penn and Teller. Personally, I mean, we're just among musicians now, the show's over, sort of thing. I find that a stupid title for a show, Foolish. That's, in my opinion, done a lot of harm to lay people's perception of magic. However, as someone who's done a lot of TV consulting over the years, not necessarily even magic, I get it. It's about the ratings. It's not a show for magicians. Right. It's a show for lay people. And for me, I think it's dreadful the way that camera cuts to here, cuts to there. There's people in the audience, and the guy who's, sort of backstage going, how did he do that? Well, just let him do his thing. It destroys it. You've got some wonderful things, but I get the concept. I get it. Yeah, okay. It's about ratings, and you have to do it that way, and that's the way lay people, love to watch it, I guess. But as Todd was saying, it is the space between the notes. It really is. He used this wonderful example before of Billie Holiday, and if you like, there was, as Todd said, and I'll use the word he used, the subversive element that didn't consciously go out and break the rules, but somewhere along the line they sort of broke and went, oh, I don't know, that sounds kind of cool. Yeah, let's do that. Yeah. And the thing that springs to mind that I used to do in a lot of the workshops, and now with, a few mentees, is Louis Armstrong. Somebody once asked him, how do you blow this top C on your trumpet? I mean, it's not possible. How do you do it? And he said, well, the thing is, I can't read or write music. I never learned how.
Right.
If I did, the rules would tell me I couldn't do this.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted it, so I just put it to my lips and I blew it to top C. Boom. So there is that part to it. where I mentioned dear Steve Dacre. I mean, it's the only guy I know. I mean, maybe there's someone else. I'd never heard of him, anybody. But in Caesar's Palace, he used to do a show 6 days a week, which was at the time, the only close-up show in Vegas at Caesar's Palace. I mean, it wasn't some little casino off strip. It was Caesar's Palace. And he was doing sponge bunnies.
Yeah.
And sponge balls. And he referred to the sponge balls as Martians and wove this wonderful tale. And people would buy tickets and watch this. So I suppose it's the ancient adage of, it ain't what you do, it's how you do it.
How you do it.
And if you become, as Todd said, it's not meaning to sound in any way arrogant. It's honing your craft so you then can turn it into an art. Does that make any sense? Yeah,
absolutely.
It's a craft, and then it becomes an art. So yeah,
I should be ready by the time I'm 103 then, so that'll be good.
Come on, you got 75 years to go yet, so you're okay. You'll be fine. Yeah. I'll tell you what, one of these days, you're welcome. One of these days, if you want to come and join us on AMI when we get it all up and running, because we'll have people there, not necessarily performers, but folks like yourself. Yes. That we're going to have mentorships and other things, and, on Zoom, if you want to learn a few things and something like that. It doesn't matter if you never actually perform it for anybody else. I'll tell you, I envy you in a way, and I'm sure Todd and a couple other people in this room will agree with me, and envy you just as much. Do you know why? I'll tell you, because you've got great joy coming the moment you do your first 2 or 3 effects. I mean, it's just absolute elation. I got it right. It just, Todd's agreeing. I'm sure everybody else is nodding here, right? I mean, it's difficult for some of us, me in particular, to go back all that way. But there is this incredible thing you just get filled with.
Yeah.
But a note of warning to you, brother, it's addictive.
It is indeed.
Yeah, the rush you get is addictive.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, it's addictive. I'm not going to lie. Who doesn't want to hear stuff like that? What do you do? Yeah, great. Yeah, love it when people say that. So, yeah, if you ever want to it doesn't have to be anything fantastic or super duper or whatever. Some of the simplest of magic is the best. If you learn 2 or 3, maybe 4, and you do them all well, and from time to time just change the script around, it's okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Anytime.
Hi, Todd. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks. How you doing?
I'm great. Todd, we've spoken several times in the past about your approach to character.
Yeah.
And I'd like you to tell everyone what you've told me on a couple of occasions, that when you get character right, when you get your routine right, you can actually take the magic out and still have an entertaining presentation.
Yes, exactly. I think Barry Richardson said that to me. He saw me do something up in, I think it was at Huddersfield, and we were in the car on the way back, and he said, "You don't need to do any tricks." And I think that was a compliment. I think sometimes almost wanting to do a trick, you're trying too hard, and I suppose the tricks then become incidental to the larger presentation you're giving, right, Brian? And I was thinking about it. I still think about that. I said, talk about, to go back to what Chris Walton was asking, just standing on stage like a stand-up comedian looks terrifying to me. Right. I think magicians sometimes hide behind their tricks because you have a prop, you have a thing, you have at least, if I'm rubbish, at least the trick's going to work and entertain people. And I think there's a kind of a comfort blanket sometimes in performing a trick. But yes, if you get the persona, character, consistency, authenticity, pattern, presentation, sequencing, all of that, the magic almost is incidental to the larger thing that you're actually sharing with your audience. And one of the best bits of feedback I had from a show was that they were baffled, entertained, and educated all at the same time. I like that. What more do you want? I'll take that, right? Baffling, entertaining, and educating at the same time. I do a a philosophy trick, and somebody at the end came up to me and said, "Never knew what that phrase meant. Now I know, and I'll never forget it." I'm like, great. So I guess that goes back to the Dead Poet Society reference, because those kids will never forget those poems. And there's a great scene in the film where they have this sort of, here's how you analyze a poem. You have the extension and the intention, and you have a scale and scores and all this stuff. And he tells them all to rip those pages out of their collection of poetry. He said, that's not how you look at poetry at all. Right now, let's read it, and there was something the way he connected with those kids. And of course, that's the great part of the film, is he connected a bit too much with them for the rigors of that school. But there's a lesson in the way he connected with those kids, because they'll never forget those lessons. And I think that's what you want when someone comes out of a show, is I think, I'm never going to forget what I saw tonight, or I'm never going to forget whatever theme or concept that I'm trying to deliver, or anyone's trying to deliver in their performances.
Part of audience management is not entirely it, but there are other things involved in audience management, and prop management and that kind of thing.
I was in a car and on a very bouncy road, and I thought I would save everybody the bouncy ride with me. So I took my camera off, but I did love talking about character development, which is one of the things that I'm always working on, is how to improve my character, make it stronger. And I love the concept of the character should be so, not necessarily educational, but the character should be so strong that you go out and be your character, and people are just inspired from that, if you did any magic or not. And I thought that was an amazing concept that, at least for me, really hit home. That was very important to me. And there were so many things that I picked up out of the whole talk that you gave that I have certainly appreciated and learned quite a bit. Thank you.
Thank you for attending. I appreciate it, Rubina. That's great. Where are you dialing in from?
San Antonio, Texas.
Oh, very cool.
So, anybody else want to add a few things, or should I let my guests go and have a suitable libation?
I was going to say there's a malt whiskey with my name on it.
I figured that. I didn't want to say it, so I just said libation. That's it.
Yeah, that was very generous of you, but I'm just going to come out with it.
Yeah. One of the interesting things about people like Todd, well, Todd obviously, and people like him, is that when you listen, sometimes you're not actually learning anything new that you didn't know before, which is not a bad thing, because it cements, confirms what you already were thinking. And you go, great, we've got this wonderful person or this experienced performer saying that. That's what I thought. Yeah, this is great. And it really doesn't matter what the rest of the guys and gals at the Magic Club say.
Right.
It really doesn't, because they're offering opinions. But when we've all seen, and to some extent done it ourselves, badly, reasonably well, and brilliantly, is ask someone to take a card. But the experience is, pick your own adjective, existential, if you like, when John Rockabalmer does that. Mm-hmm. There was something about John Rockabalmer spreading a deck and asking you to take a card. Probably because he's written more on card magic than anybody, performs more, wrote the Bible on Marlowe. So, he's the man. So all of that, as Todd was saying earlier on, you build that over the years, etc., and you just sit there and go, whoa, okay, yeah, right, And this is what happens, I think, whatever character we're playing, because yes, it's still Todd, but at the same token, he's wearing his professor's gown and he's the academic magician. But all the things he's spoken about at the United Nations and other places of similar ilk are there. And, somebody comes up and says something to you, in the middle of a routine, and Socrates said whatever, boom, that computer kicks in and you can come back with something. No, really, if you don't have it, then you can't come back with it. And then you think, yeah, that was a good one. I'll put that in the script.
It's all performance.
It is performance. It's all about performance and presentation.
Yeah.
And the magic is really secondary.
Hmm.
I mean, I've said this before and I'll say it again 1,000 times. A ballet dancer is a ballet dancer, and they're skilled, and you watch them and you think, yeah, it's great. Why was it that Dame Margot Fontaine moved grown men to tears when she was the dying swan on stage?
Yeah.
It was just another, if you analyze it, was just another ballet dancer standing there, or lying down in this instance, because the swan was dying.
Sure.
And you know, the tears running down their cheeks. Someone had a lump in my throat as well. So what is it that does that? It's all that experience from before and countless rehearsals. And I'll finish on one note to give you something to think about. Some of you may have seen it, some of you may have not. Fred Astaire was extraordinarily meticulous, and you know, people use the word perfectionist like it's some kind of insult. I actually think it's a good word. There's a bit, I think it's on YouTube, I can't remember exactly, where he, in the middle of a routine, drops a cigarette and then stubs it out. I don't know for a fact, but I've heard this from people who do know, and they've told me that he went through that well over 80 times, maybe even 100.
Mhm.
Everyone was good. The director, the choreographer, good. That's great, that's fine. He goes, nope, I'm not feeling it. That's great. Till he did it. And then other things, you just go there, one take, boom, you've done it. So some of you all think about if you like, or ignore, doesn't matter. Well, stay tuned. We will keep you up to date on the next Darkstone Dossiers is in July. And I have an amazing young, well, everybody's young to me. He's not quite 30 yet, called Radek Hoffman. To use a magic term, a brilliant mentalist, originally from Poland. He now lives in London. And I have to be honest, I'd never heard of him. I have a ton of people lined up to be guests. And Mark Paul, who some of you would have heard of, shame on you if you haven't. Todd's not.
Oh, he's great.
Andrew's, well, I'm not Mark for years and years. I met him, Keith Church's thing back in the day at Lucote School, Reading Day. My son competed and won, blah, blah, blah. And that's when I met Mark. And then since then, drive us around with Bobby Bernard. And yeah, I'm reminiscing. Old guys do that. Anyway, Mark got in touch with me. He was my guest a couple of years ago on the Darkstone Dossiers. And he said, get in touch with this guy. You'd like him. And I went, I've never heard of him, Mark. He said, trust me. I went, okay, I will. Mark Paul. So I got in touch with this young man, and yeah, really amazing. I'm looking forward to having him in July. I'll keep you posted. All remains is to thank you for attending. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I have. I knew I would. And of course, huge thanks to Austin Moody and Michael Kelly for helping with a lot of stuff behind the scenes, etc. And to Todd. So switch on your mics if you would, please. We love to hear applause. Okay, ready, go for it.
Thank you, everyone.
Everybody.
Thank you so much. Really
Thank you,
enjoyed
Todd.
it.
Thank you.
It's my pleasure.
Well, this
Thank
was a
you.
lovely experience.
Thank you.